The town of Hollow Creek had always been quiet, and its residents had come to expect calm, peaceful days. That was until Harold's funeral. As mourners gathered around the gravesite, a dog, one no one recognized, began barking furiously at the coffin. It was no ordinary barking. It was desperate and frantic, almost as if the animal was trying to communicate something. Ethan, who had known Harold his entire life, was taken aback. He watched in confusion as the dog's barking intensified, drawing the attention of the entire crowd. Father David, the priest, seemed visibly shaken. His hands trembled as he clasped them together, and his voice faltered as he continued the service. Ethan, unable to ignore the strange behavior of both the dog and the priest, stepped forward and asked, "Father, why is the dog barking like that? What's going on?" Father David paused, visibly startled by the question. After a long moment, he answered with forced calm, "It's nothing, Ethan. Just a stray, upset by the crowd." But there was an unease in his voice that made Ethan's skin crawl. As the ceremony continued, the dog refused to stop barking, and the priest seemed to grow increasingly uncomfortable. Ethan couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. That night he lay awake in his bed, unable to shake the feeling that the dog's behavior was a sign of something much darker, something he couldn't yet understand. The air around the town felt heavier, like an unseen force was watching, waiting. The day after Harold's funeral, Ethan could still hear the sound of the dog's barking echoing in his mind. He felt restless and uneasy, convinced that something significant had happened during the service. There was something about the dog's behavior that lingered with him, like an unanswered question hanging in the air. Unable to shake the feeling of dread, Ethan decided to visit Harold's house to check on the family. When he arrived, he was shocked to find the house abandoned, the front door creaking in the wind. No one seemed to be home. Curiosity gnawed at him as he stepped inside, unsure of what he was searching for. The house, once full of life and warmth, felt cold and empty now. As he moved through the rooms, Ethan noticed something strange. The wooden door to the cellar had symbols carved into it, symbols that looked eerily familiar. His heart skipped a beat. These were the same symbols he had seen during the funeral. Suddenly, the dog appeared again, standing at the threshold of the cellar, staring at Ethan with piercing eyes. Its tail was stiff, and its growls were low and menacing. Ethan moved toward the dog, but as he took a step closer, the animal backed away, barking frantically. Ethan froze, a cold shiver running down his spine. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from nowhere, he heard a faint whisper in his mind. "The truth lies buried. Seek the past. Find the key before it finds you." The voice seemed to echo within the walls, but Ethan couldn't tell if it was real or just in his mind. But one thing was clear. His curiosity had awakened something deep within Hollow Creek. He had to learn more. The warning was clear, but what did it mean? Ethan spent the next few hours pacing his room, trying to make sense of the message. He couldn't stop thinking about the symbols, the dog, and the cryptic warning. His search for answers led him to the town's library, where he hoped to find some historical documents related to the strange occurrences in Hollow Creek. The librarian, Margaret, an old woman with a wealth of knowledge, noticed his growing obsession. She had seen many strange things in her time, but nothing like the fear in Ethan's eyes. After watching him for a while, Margaret pulled him aside. "Those symbols," she said softly, "they're not just for decoration. They're part of an ancient pact, one that the town's founders made centuries ago." Ethan's brow furrowed. "A pact? What kind of pact?" Margaret hesitated before speaking again, her voice low and cautious. "The pact was made to protect the town from something dark, something evil, but the price of that protection was steep. Every generation, a life must be offered to the entity to maintain the balance. Harold, he was the last. But now, Ethan, the cycle has started again." Ethan's heart sank as the weight of her words settled in. "A life every generation," he repeated. "What does that mean for me?" Margaret's eyes grew sad. "It means you're the next one. You're the chosen sacrifice, whether you like it or not. The dog, it was never just a stray. It's been watching over you." As she spoke, Ethan's mind raced. He could feel the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. What could he do to stop this? Was there a way out, or was his fate sealed? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but there was still so much Ethan didn't understand. If Harold was the last sacrifice, then why had he been chosen? And what exactly did this ancient pact entail? To find answers, Ethan spent another day at the library, searching through old documents and town records. After hours of fruitless searching, he discovered a hidden drawer behind the librarian's desk. Inside was a worn map of Hollow Creek, the edges frayed with age. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he examined the map. It was unlike anything he had seen before. Several locations around town were marked with strange symbols, symbols that matched the ones on Harold's door. One location in particular stood out, a spot deep in the woods, not far from the town's outskirts. Ethan could feel an inexplicable pull toward that area. The dog appeared again, sitting silently at the door, its eyes focused on Ethan. As he made to leave, it barked twice, as though warning him not to go. But Ethan couldn't ignore the pull. He grabbed the map, his mind set on uncovering the truth. With one last look at the dog, he stepped outside and headed toward the woods, unaware of what he would find. The forest loomed in the distance, dark and thick, as though it was hiding something important. The air grew heavier with each step. The woods were dark and quiet as Ethan walked deeper into the forest. The map clutched tightly in his hand. He could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful all around him. The air seemed to grow thicker the further he went, and the trees above seemed to close in, blocking out the light. As he approached the spot marked on the map, the eerie feeling grew stronger. Then through the trees, he saw it, an old moss-covered stone altar, its surface engraved with symbols he recognized from the journal. The dog appeared again, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It circled the altar, growling softly, as if guarding it. Ethan took a cautious step forward, his pulse quickening. Before he could get any closer, Father David suddenly emerged from the shadows. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan," he warned. "This place, this altar, it's part of the pact. It's where the sacrifices are made." Ethan's mind raced. "Sacrifices? What do you mean?" Father David sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "The town's founders made a deal to protect us from a dark entity. Every generation, a life must be offered to keep the evil at bay. Harold was the last one, but the cycle has begun again. And now, it's your turn." Ethan felt the ground beneath his feet shift. The priest's words hit him like a tidal wave, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He didn't want to be part of this cursed tradition. His life mattered. He had to stop it. Father David's revelation hit Ethan like a thunderclap. A pact, a life every generation. It all started to make sense. But that didn't mean Ethan was ready to accept it. He refused to believe that he was destined to die in place of Harold. There had to be another way. "The dog," Father David murmured, glancing nervously at the creature. "It's not just a stray, it's the entity's agent. It chooses who will be sacrificed. Harold was chosen, and now, it's you." Ethan felt his chest tighten. The dog wasn't a random animal. It had been watching him for a reason. It had been guiding him, pulling him toward the altar, to this moment. Father David looked around, making sure no one else was nearby. "You must understand, Ethan. If the pact isn't honored, if the sacrifice is not made, the evil will return. It will destroy everything, the town, the people, everything." Ethan's mind raced. "There must be another way. I can't let this happen." Father David's eyes filled with sorrow. "You don't have a choice. The ritual must take place." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He refused to give up, but the road ahead seemed impossible. The weight of the decision before him pressed hard, and his thoughts kept circling back to the dog, the entity, and the legacy of terror that had haunted this town for generations. Could he stop it? As Ethan stood before the altar, trying to absorb the weight of Father David's words, a tall figure emerged from the shadows. The cloaked man's presence was chilling, and his eyes, though hidden beneath the hood, seemed to pierce through Ethan's very soul. The dog stood at attention, its eyes unwavering. "You've come this far, Ethan," the cloaked man said, his voice gravelly and deep. "But it's too late. The pact will be fulfilled. The entity demands its due. Ethan took a step back, fear rising in his chest. What do you want from me? I won't let you control me. The cloaked man smiled, though it was a cruel, empty smile. It's not about what I want, it's about fate. The pact is a cycle, and you are part of it. Ethan's mind raced, trying to find a way out. But before he could react, the dog leaped toward him, growling and snapping. The cloaked man raised his hand, and the dog halted, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. You will come with me, the cloaked man said. There is no escape. Ethan's pulse raced as he backed away. But deep down, he knew there had to be a way to fight back. He couldn't just give in. Ethan's mind raced as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. He wasn't ready to give in. Not to the cloaked man, not to the dog, and certainly not to the pact that had been forced upon him. He needed to fight. But how? With a surge of adrenaline, Ethan pushed past the cloaked man and ran toward the altar. As he approached, he remembered the journal that had warned him about the pact. He pulled it out from his backpack and began flipping through its pages, desperate for a solution. The cloaked man's voice echoed behind him. You can't stop this. The pact is unbreakable. But Ethan didn't listen. His fingers found the passage he was searching for. It spoke of a ritual that could end the pact, a way to sever the bond between the town and the dark force. It was risky, but it was the only chance he had. As he read the incantation aloud, the ground beneath him trembled. The dog's howl was deafening, and the atmosphere grew heavy with dark energy. The ritual was starting, and Ethan's heart raced in anticipation. It was now or never. The words of the incantation echoed in the clearing, growing louder with each passing moment. Ethan's voice trembled, but he forced himself to continue. As he spoke, the ground beneath his feet began to shake, and a dark shadow loomed over the altar. The cloaked man stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. You fool, he hissed. You can't stop it. The pact will be fulfilled. It must be. But Ethan didn't falter. The symbols on the altar glowed, and the shadows seemed to gather around him, tightening their grip. The dog howled again, louder than before, as if in warning. Suddenly, the shadow grew stronger, materializing into a dark, monstrous form. The entity was awakening. It reached out toward Ethan with long, skeletal hands, its eyes glowing with malevolent power. But before it could touch him, the dog lunged forward, positioning itself between Ethan and the entity. The creature stopped, its eyes locked on the dog. It was the key. The dog had been the true source of the ritual, the agent sent to protect the pact. With one final cry, the dog jumped into the air, its body glowing with bright energy. The entity screamed as it was pulled back into the darkness. The air cleared, and the trembling stopped. Ethan, exhausted but determined, stood tall. The cycle was broken. The pact was no more. As dawn broke over Hollow Creek, Ethan stood alone at the altar, the dog's body now gone. The ritual had worked, and the darkness that had plagued the town for centuries had finally been banished. But the price had been high. Ethan looked down at the journal in his hands. The cloak of secrecy had lifted, but the weight of the past still lingered. The cycle had ended, but its shadow would forever hang over the town. With a final glance at the altar, Ethan turned and walked back toward Hollow Creek, ready to live a life free from the shadows that had once haunted him. But he would never forget the lessons learned, or the courage it had taken to break the cycle. Hollow Creek was free, for now.